They laughed through most of Christmas dinner. Not loudly enough to call it cruelty, just enough to make sure Mason and Ava heard every joke, every comparison, every reminder that our side of the family ranked below Camille's. By midnight, the same people were calling me like their lives depended on an answer. My phone lit up across the dark kitchen table. Bennett Hart called 13 times in 4 minutes. My mother left 3 voicemails, crying so hard that entire sentences collapsed into fragments. Camille did not cry. She screamed one question into my inbox again and again. What did you do? Not, why did you leave? Not, are the kids okay? Just that. What did you do? I sat alone in my townhouse at 10:52 on Christmas night. Mason and Ava were asleep upstairs. A locked case file rested beside my elbow, thick with bank records, shell company filings, forged signatures, and 6 months of work performed under federal oversight. Across the table, my phone vibrated again. 14 missed calls. Then 20. Then a message from Bennett. What truth is already moving? I read it twice. He was trying to sound confused. He sounded terrified. Earlier that night, after watching my children sit empty-handed while their cousins disappeared beneath wrapping paper, I had sent one message to the family group chat. Do not invite my children again. They are done being your family's punchline. The truth you are afraid of was already moving before tonight. Nobody panics over a man they truly believe is powerless. I turned the phone face down, went upstairs, and stood between my children's bedrooms listening to them breathe. By the next business day, Bennett's name would appear on federal paperwork. He could not laugh away. But Christmas was not where this began. It was only where I finally stopped pretending not to see it. My name is Nolan Reeves. I was 40 years old that Christmas, divorced for 4 years, and raising 2 children who had learned far too early how adults hide cruelty inside jokes. Mason was 12. He read everything he could get his hands on, noticed more than he admitted, and had developed the habit of stepping between Ava and anything that might hurt her. Ava was 9. She still believed family traditions meant safety. She made handmade cards for people who forgot her birthday and saved the best pieces of candy for grandparents who rarely asked what she liked. I founded Reeves Forensic Advisory 7 years earlier, after leaving an accounting firm and rebuilding my life from a small rented office. We now occupied the 16th floor downtown and employed 18 people. My family still described it as Nolan's little consulting business. My parents, Robert and Elaine Reeves, lived in a colonial outside Brookhaven. My father was a retired bridge engineer who treated every family disagreement like a meeting that had gone off agenda. My mother recorded birthdays, holidays, and graduations, then somehow preserved only the moments that supported the story she preferred. My older sister, Camille Hart, was 44 and flawlessly assembled. She was married to Bennett, a regional finance executive at Northstar Biomedical Research Trust. They had one son, Grayson, 14, who had learned that confidence could sound almost identical to contempt. In our family's private ranking system, Camille had won. Long marriage, large house, successful husband, one polished child. I was the divorced son with 2 kids, a townhouse, and a job nobody understood. Outside that house, I was trusted to trace millions of dollars through shell companies and forged records. Inside it, I was still the one people spoke over. And my children had inherited my position before they were old enough to understand it. The first time I understood the difference in treatment was not accidental. Grayson was 12. We were at my parents' house for Thanksgiving. Mason had worn black sneakers I bought on sale because he was growing too fast to justify spending more. Grayson looked down at them and said, "Those are the kind of shoes kids wear when their dads can't afford the real ones." Mason went quiet. Camille was standing 4 feet away. She heard him. I knew she heard him because she paused while reaching for the bread basket. She did not correct her son. After dinner, I pulled her aside. That cannot happen again. She gave me the patient look she used whenever she had already decided I was overreacting. He's a kid, Nolan. He knew exactly what he was saying. Don't turn everything into an investigation. I remembered that sentence. The second time was Easter. Elaine arranged baskets across the living room table. Grayson received one filled with imported candy, headphones, gift cards, and a sweatshirt. 2 other cousins had baskets nearly as large. Mason and Ava each received a small envelope containing $10. Ava held hers against her dress and stared at Grayson pulling tissue paper from his basket. Is ours somewhere else? She whispered. I told her no. Then I smiled and said their envelopes were easier to carry home. She believed me because she was 8 and still thought I would always have an explanation that made adults fair. On the drive back, neither child spoke. I spent the trip inventing excuses for my mother. Maybe she had miscounted. Maybe Camille had purchased the baskets herself. Maybe it was careless rather than deliberate. The third time removed every excuse. In October, I ran into my cousin Naomi at a coffee shop. We talked about work, the children, and the divorce. Then she mentioned that Camille had been worried about me. Worried how? Naomi stirred her coffee. She said the firm was struggling. That Rachel leaving put you in a bad financial position. That Mason and Ava needed more stability than you could provide. I set my cup down carefully. The previous year, Reeves Forensic Advisory had grossed $2.8 million. My car was paid off. The children's tuition was paid every August. I had never asked Camille for money. But inside my family, she had built another version of me, the divorced father barely holding his life together. I had spent years making that lie easier to believe by staying silent. Once they believed that version, treating my children as less fortunate stopped looking cruel to them. It started looking appropriate. For months before Christmas, Reeves Forensic Advisory was retained to review the internal controls of the North Star Biomedical Research Trust. The assignment sounded narrow. North Star managed a clinical trial oversight fund supported by private endowments and federal grant money. Our job was to determine whether vendor approvals, disbursements, and reporting procedures were adequate. They were not. Within 6 weeks, Mateo and I found 3 limited liability companies formed in different states over 19 months. Each was registered under a variation of Camille's name. Camille Elise Hart. C. E. Hart Advisory. Elise Hart Biomedical Consulting. At first, I thought Bennett had used her identity to create legitimate side businesses. Then we traced the payments. North Star had transferred money to all 3 companies for consulting work, compliance reviews, and data management services. The invoices were polished. The supporting documents were not. Several projects had no deliverables. Vendor approvals carried signatures from executives who were out of state on the dates they supposedly signed them. One group of contracts totaled $946,000. The signatures looked convincing until our document examiner compared the pressure patterns, letter spacing, and repeated pen lifts against verified samples. They were forged. The deeper we went, the worse it became. Money moved from North Star into the 3 companies, then through smaller accounts before appearing in real estate purchases and secured loans. The total exposure reached $5.1 million. Then I found my father's lake house. Robert planned to retire there. He had spent years repairing the dock, replacing the roof, and imagining retirement mornings on the water. The property appeared as collateral on a loan tied to one of the shell companies. His signature was on the paperwork. The disclosure language was vague enough to hide what he had authorized. I sat alone with that document for an hour. Bennett had not only stolen from a research fund. He had built the structure using my sister's name and my father's trust. And nobody in my family knew I was the person looking at it. I waited 3 days before calling Camille. Not because I doubted what I had found. I wanted to give her the one thing Bennett had not given our family, a chance to understand what was happening before strangers with badges explained it for her. We met at a coffee shop near her house. Camille arrived late, wearing a cream coat and looking inconvenienced. I kept my voice low. Bennett is in serious trouble. She stared at me. Your name appears on 3 companies receiving money from North Star. I do not believe you created them, but you need an attorney who represents you, not Bennett. For 1 second, I thought she understood. Then she laughed. It was not nervous laughter. It was full and dismissive, the sound of someone hearing something too ridiculous to deserve fear. You are jealous of him. Camille. You always have been. Bennett built a real career, and you started some little firm after Rachel left. I looked at her across the table. Those companies are being used to move millions of dollars. My name is on businesses my husband manages. That is normal. Not when the signatures are forged. Her face hardened. This is what the divorce did to you. You look at successful people and see crimes because it makes you feel important. I gave her the name of an independent attorney and told her not to sign anything Bennett placed in front of her. She stood, lifted her bag, and said, "Get help, Nolan." Then she walked out. I paid for both coffees. Back at the office, I documented the conversation, disclosed my family connection in writing, and requested formal conflict safeguards. Then I called Mateo. She did not listen, I said. They rarely do, he answered. After that, we moved forward. Mateo Cruz had been constructing the evidentiary chain beside me since September. He was 54, a former IRS criminal investigation special agent with 24 years in financial crimes, and he treated every document as if a hostile attorney were already holding it under courtroom lights. Every file was dated. Every transfer was sourced. Every signature had a chain of custody. Once I disclosed that Bennett was my brother-in-law, Mateo took control of the evidence log. I remained the forensic specialist, but I no longer decided what moved or who saw it first. That separation mattered. Our federal contact was Special Agent Nia Okafor from the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. She spoke in short sentences, carried one legal pad, and never promised anything she could not authorize. A parallel review by a federal health oversight office had already flagged irregular payments inside North Star. Our records gave those irregularities structure. In November, Mateo and I presented the full package. The shell companies. The forged approvals. The bank transfers. The loan secured by my father's lake house. Nia read for nearly 40 minutes without interrupting. Then she looked at me. You understand that from this point forward, the government controls timing. Yes. You do not contact Bennett about the investigation. I warned Camille before the referral was formalized. That conversation is documented. She wrote it down. Anything else personal? My children still see them at family events. That answer made her pause. The warrant and subpoena applications would go through prosecutors and a magistrate. I could provide analysis, answer questions, and preserve evidence. I could not choose the day. By mid-December, The applications were ready for review immediately after the holiday closure. The case was moving whether my family knew it or not. Then Christmas arrived, and they gave me a reason to stop protecting them from the truth. My parents' Christmas party began at 4 in the afternoon, the way it had for as long as I could remember. Mason wore a navy button-down he had ironed himself. Ava chose a dark green dress and carried a card she had made for my parents, with a crooked silver tree drawn across the front. Elaine opened the door with her phone already recording. "There they are," she said, sweeping the camera toward us. Ava smiled and held up the card. My mother thanked her without lowering the phone. Inside, the house looked staged for a catalog. Garland followed the staircase. Candles burned along the dining room table. Gifts covered the floor beneath the tree and spilled into organized stacks along the wall. Camille's family had one section. My aunt's grandchildren had another. There were bags with metallic ribbons, long boxes, gift card envelopes, and packages large enough to hide behind. I saw the problem before Mason and Ava did. Their names were nowhere. I checked again. I read every tag I could see, then scanned the room the way I reviewed an account ledger, looking for the missing line, the item recorded somewhere else. Nothing. For the first hour, I told myself Elaine had stored their gifts in another room. Maybe she planned to bring them out later. Maybe Camille had rearranged the stacks. Maybe I had simply overlooked 2 small packages in a room crowded with color. I kept inventing explanations because the alternative required me to admit that the people around us had planned this. At 5:30, my mother announced that it was time to open presents. She raised her phone higher. Grayson moved first. He tore into a large box and pulled out a new console, a gaming monitor, and a set of wireless accessories. Bennett announced that the entire setup had cost nearly $650. Everyone reacted exactly as expected. Grayson grinned. Wrapping paper covered the floor. The other cousins opened coats, watches, headphones, gift cards, and boxes of expensive shoes. Ava sat beside me with both hands folded in her lap. At first, she watched with real excitement, waiting for her turn. Then she looked toward the remaining presents. Then at me. "Are ours somewhere else?" she whispered. I felt Mason turn toward us. "I'm checking," I said. There was nothing left to check. Across the room, Elaine kept filming, narrating each gift as though the scene were complete. Mason shifted closer to Ava until their shoulders touched. He stared at the carpet, jaw set, already understanding what his sister was still trying not to understand. I stood and walked toward the tree. I checked behind the larger boxes, beneath the table, and beside the fireplace. Camille watched me from the couch. She knew exactly what I was doing. She said nothing. When I returned to my chair, Ava's smile was gone. Grayson noticed. He leaned back with a controller box balanced on one knee and looked directly at both of my children. The room was still loud enough for an adult to pretend not to hear. But every child heard him. That was when he decided to say it. Grayson lifted the controller box and smirked. Guess they didn't earn anything this year. The laughter around the room thinned, but nobody corrected him. Ava looked at me first. Then she looked at Elaine, still holding her phone. My mother lowered it just enough to meet Ava's eyes. "Well," she said, calm as if she were commenting on the weather, "some children give their grandparents more reasons to be proud." Ava's face changed. There was no dramatic sob. Her mouth trembled once, and she turned toward me as though she could hide inside the space beside my chair. Mason put one hand over hers. Camille smiled from the couch. Not broadly. Just enough. I felt something in me go cold. I had spent years absorbing insults because I thought that was what a strong man did. I told myself I could take it. I told myself the children needed grandparents, cousins, traditions, a larger family than the three of us inside our townhouse. Then I saw my daughter trying to disappear at Christmas. I stood. I picked up Ava's coat, then Mason's. Robert looked over from the dining table. Nolan, don't start. I'm not starting anything. Camille leaned back. You're seriously leaving over presents? I helped Ava into her coat. No. Grayson tossed a strip of wrapping paper into the air. Maybe next year they'll deserve some. Mason's shoulders tightened. I looked at Camille. She was watching my children, not with embarrassment, but satisfaction. That was worse than forgetting the gifts. You think this is about money, I said. What else would it be about? It's about the fact that you enjoyed it. Her expression finally shifted. Only slightly, but I saw it. Robert set down his glass. That is enough. You're making everyone uncomfortable. I turned toward him. They were comfortable while your granddaughter cried. He glanced away. Elaine raised the phone again, not to apologize, but to record the scene she had helped create. I stepped between the camera and my children. Put it down. She looked offended. Nolan, do not speak to me like that in my house. Then stop filming my children. Nobody moved. Nobody apologized. Nobody told Ava she mattered. Camille said, You always do this. You turn every family gathering into proof that everyone is against you. I looked at her for a long moment. No, I keep trying to believe you aren't. Then I took Mason's hand, guided Ava toward the door, and walked out. Behind us, the party resumed before the front door had even closed. That sound followed me to the car. Laughter. Paper tearing. Glasses touching. My children had been humiliated in a room full of adults, and the people who loved us had decided the real problem was that I refused to sit there quietly that night. We drove for 15 minutes without speaking. The heater ran too high, but neither child complained. Ava had stopped crying. She watched Christmas lights blur across the window while Mason kept one hand over hers. Then he asked quietly, Dad, did we do something wrong? I pulled into a parking lot and turned around. No, I said, you did nothing wrong. Ava wiped her face with her sleeve. Then why don't they like us? I had spent my career explaining fraud, motive, and intent in plain language. I had no language for this. My family had used my children to confirm where they believed I belonged. Their empty hands made everyone else's gifts feel larger. They were not being punished for anything they had done. I could not explain that to a 9-year-old. So I said, the adults in that room failed you, not the other way around. At home, I made hot chocolate and stayed upstairs until both children were asleep. Then I opened the family group chat and typed, Do not invite my children again. They are done being your family's punchline. The truth you are afraid of was already moving before tonight. I pressed send. The phone started vibrating before I could place it on the table. Bennett called first. Then Camille. Then my mother. Within minutes, I had 32 missed calls and a message from Bennett. What truth? They were not afraid of losing us. They were afraid I knew what they had done. The next morning, I took Mason and Ava to school before driving downtown. Neither child mentioned Christmas. Mason carried Ava's backpack, and she hugged me longer than usual before following him inside. At 8:20, Harper met me outside the elevator with a sealed envelope. Federal Courier. Inside were subpoenas and preservation orders for Bennett Hart, Camille Hart, and the 3 shell companies. The government had also authorized action involving North Star's records. Nothing in those documents existed because of Christmas. The applications had been prepared before my children sat beneath that tree with empty hands. Christmas had changed only one thing. I no longer felt responsible for cushioning the impact. Mateo reviewed the service timeline. Because Bennett was my brother-in-law, Mateo remained custodian of the evidence, and Nia's team controlled every federal action. At 11:36, Harper called. Bennett Hart is downstairs. He says it's urgent. Put him in conference room 2. Keep the camera running. Bennett entered 10 minutes later wearing a charcoal coat that probably cost more than my first office lease. He stopped when he saw the reception area. 18 employees worked behind glass partitions. Our firm's name was etched into the conference room doors. This is your company? It has been for 7 years. He sat before I invited him. Mateo remained at the far end of the table. Bennett placed the subpoena between us. What did you do? I did not issue that. You started this. North Star's records started this. His jaw tightened. You sent that message to threaten us. No, I removed my children from a family that humiliated them. Your legal problems existed before dinner. He leaned forward. You have no idea what you're talking about. I opened a copy of the service packet. 3 LLCs using variations of Camille's name. Vendor contracts totaling $946,000. Approval signatures attributed to executives who were outside Minnesota on the dates they supposedly signed. His eyes moved toward Mateo. A document examiner compared the originals with verified samples. I continued. The signatures are forged. Bennett's confidence narrowed. I had seen that change before. It was the moment someone stopped wondering whether you knew something and started wondering how much. You're making assumptions. We traced more than $5 million through those entities. That proves nothing. The invoices have no deliverables. The transfers show where the money went. Then I mentioned the lake house. My father's property was pledged as collateral for a loan connected to one of the companies. For the first time, Bennett stopped speaking. He signed it. He signed a document you presented without a clear explanation. You cannot prove that. Not yet. That answer unsettled him more than certainty would have. Robert had not been formally interviewed. The records identified him as a likely victim. The government would determine the rest. Bennett stood. If this becomes public, everyone gets destroyed. Camille, your parents, Grayson. There it was. Not innocence. Collateral damage. I stayed seated. You should speak to your attorney. You think you're protected because you handed this to the FBI? I think this conversation is over. He looked toward Mateo. Who is he? The person preserving this meeting. Bennett noticed the camera. For the first time since entering, he looked uncertain about everything he had said. He buttoned his coat. You always hated me. No, I said. You needed me to. He paused. Bennett had spent years telling my family I was jealous, unstable, and desperate. If I hated him, every document could be dismissed as revenge. But I had disclosed the conflict, stepped away from evidence custody, and warned Camille before the case became public. He had not found an angry brother-in-law improvising retaliation. He had found a documented investigation he could not reduce to family drama. Harper opened the door. Bennett left without another word. At 2:10, federal agents entered North Star's regional offices. By 3, employees stood outside while investigators carried sealed boxes through the lobby. By 6, Bennett's name was on every local news station. For years, he had treated my silence as proof that I had nothing. Now silence was all he had left. The North Star search dominated local news for the next 48 hours. Footage showed federal agents carrying sealed boxes through the regional office while employees stood behind police tape in winter coats. Reporters repeated the same phrases: suspected embezzlement, federal grant money, multimillion-dollar shell company scheme. I did not speak to the press. Neither did Mateo. North Star released a statement confirming that an independent forensic firm had identified irregularities and referred them to federal authorities. The following afternoon, part of the affidavit supporting the search became public. A business reporter connected the documents to Reeves' forensic advisory. The article described our firm as the lead independent forensic consultant and identified me by name. Nolan Reeves, founder and managing director. Harper stood beside my desk reading the article from her phone. For several seconds, she said nothing. Then she looked at me. These are the same people who told everyone you were the divorced father barely keeping a small company alive. Yes. How does this feel? My phone was already filling with messages. Relatives who had ignored Ava's empty lap suddenly wanted explanations. People who had laughed at Christmas were asking whether Robert's house was safe and whether Camille would be charged. I thought about Mason staring at the carpet so nobody would see him react. I thought about Ava turning toward me when her face began to break. It feels like enough, I said. Not victory. Not revenge. Enough. For the first time, my family could not control the version of me other people saw. At 6:41 that evening, while my phone was still filling with family names, a message arrived through our intake portal. They did not just use you, they used your children too. I kept the proof. The sender had not requested a consultation or attached a complaint. The language felt chosen. Not I know something. Not call me. Used your children. I forwarded it to Mateo without replying. He called 3 minutes later. Do not engage yet. Can you identify him? I'm working on it. 47 minutes later, he entered my office carrying a personnel record. The sender was Ellis Warren, 51, North Star's former auditor. He had supposedly resigned 14 months before our firm was retained. Except he had not really resigned. His file said voluntary departure. Internal correspondence told a different story. Ellis had raised concerns about vendor payments, identified 2 shell companies, and asked North Star's compliance committee to freeze several accounts. 9 days later, his access was revoked. 2 weeks after that, he was offered severance tied to a broad confidentiality clause. He refused to sign and disappeared from the industry. I called Nia. The pause after I said his name lasted less than a second, but I heard it. We have been trying to locate him, she said. Why? He may be the first person who documented the scheme internally. Ellis had kept copies. Emails, vendor reports, meeting notes. The compliance complaint North Star claimed had never existed. He had waited because approaching law enforcement without protection could destroy his chance of working again. The search warrant changed that. When he saw agents entering North Star, he knew someone outside the company had finally built a case strong enough to survive. Nia arranged a protected interview for next morning. Before we ended the call, I asked the question that mattered most. Why did he mention my children? I do not know yet, she said, but he attached one email chain with your name in it. My office had gone dark around me, the city reflected in the windows 16 floors below. Until then, I believed Bennett had stolen money and used my family's names to hide it. The message suggested something worse. He had been planning for me before I ever opened the first North Star file. Ellis's first interview lasted nearly 4 hours. By the time Nia sent Mateo and me the relevant email chain, the office had emptied. Only the lights above the conference table remained on. The oldest message was dated 16 months before our firm received the North Star engagement. Bennett had written to a board member about the possibility of an outside forensic review. He named me. Nolan Reeves is likely to be considered. He has an existing personal bias and is navigating financial instability following his divorce. His credibility should be evaluated before any appointment is made. I read it twice. There was more. In later messages, Bennett described me as resentful of Camille's marriage, emotionally volatile, and desperate to save a failing business. He suggested those concerns would carry more weight if they came from people close to me. My parents. My sister. Relatives who could claim they had watched me struggle. He had not simply hoped the family would underestimate me. He had been feeding them a story designed to become evidence against me. Camille repeated that my firm was failing. Elaine treated Mason and Ava like children who should be grateful for scraps. Robert accepted Bennett's explanations because Bennett looked successful and I never defended myself. Every insult had seemed personal. Now I could see the structure beneath it. Bennett wanted to poison the audit before it began. If I was selected, he could argue I had targeted him out of jealousy. If I found fraud, he could claim the evidence came from a bitter brother-in-law trying to destroy the man his family respected more. My children had become part of that story. Their clothes, their school, our townhouse, the divorce. Each detail helped make me look unstable and financially desperate. Mateo read the final email. You thought this was family cruelty, he said. It was. And strategy. I looked at the screen. Bennett had not created my family's hierarchy. Camille needed to be the successful one. Elaine favored the picture that looked best. Robert confused silence with weakness. Bennett found the weapon already loaded. Then he pointed it at my children. Bennett Hart was indicted 6 weeks later on multiple counts of federal wire fraud, money laundering, and filing fraudulent financial instruments. His attorney entered a not guilty plea. The trial date had not been set. Camille was not charged. The evidence supported what I had believed from the beginning. Bennett had used variations of her name to create the shell companies, but she did not understand how the entities were being used. That did not make her innocent of everything. It only meant her cruelty was not a federal crime. Camille had dismissed my warning, repeated Bennett's lies, and watched my children be humiliated at Christmas. She had smiled while Ava cried. She still never called me. Robert was formally interviewed after the search. Once investigators showed him the loan documents in plain language, he understood that Bennett had used the lake house as collateral without properly explaining the risk. My father provided emails, financial records, and every document Bennett had asked him to sign. His cooperation helped separate him from the scheme and protect the property. 3 weeks after the indictment, Robert called me. He apologized once. Quietly. Then he cried for less than a minute, the way men from his generation sometimes cry, as if grief is something they must finish quickly before anyone notices. I believed him. Elaine never called. No apology. No question about Mason or Ava. Nothing. I thought I would feel satisfied watching Bennett's reputation collapse. Mostly, I thought about Grayson. He was 14, old enough to understand that his father was accused of stealing millions, but too young to understand how much of his own behavior had been copied from the man now appearing on the news. Grayson had hurt my children. That was true. It was also true that he had been taught contempt by the two people responsible for teaching him everything else. There was no victory in that. Only another child discovering that the adult he had modeled himself after was not powerful. He was fraudulent. The law would decide what Bennett deserved. I had already decided what my children deserved. Distance. Safety. And a family tradition that did not require them to earn a place at the table. For months after Christmas, Reeves Forensic Advisory signed a consulting agreement with a regional bank. Mateo received a commendation from Mia's division. Harper got the raise she had earned. Bennett's case was still moving through court. Camille remained silent. Elaine did too. One Sunday morning, Ava sat at the kitchen counter drawing ornaments while Mason made pancakes. "Are we going to Grandma's next Christmas?" Ava asked. I looked at Mason. He kept his eyes on the pan, but his shoulders went still. "No," I said. Ava considered that. "Then where are we going?" "Nowhere. We have to earn our place." She smiled. "Can we make our own Christmas?" "Yes." "What would we do?" "I don't know yet." Mason turned from the stove. "We could invent it." That became the plan. Not a replacement holiday. Not revenge. Just a table where nobody measured affection by marriage, money, gifts, or whose family looked best in photographs. For years, I wanted my parents to see me accurately. The firm, the paid bills, the children I had raised, the life I rebuilt after divorce. I no longer needed them to understand any of it. They called me the lesser son because I never demanded recognition. By the time they finally looked closely, the investigation was complete, my children were safe, and I had stopped asking for a seat. I was never the lesser son. I was simply working while they were laughing.